Hi, and welcome to part two of the Unit 3 lecture for EDSE 630. So we just finished talking about some of the basic sort of preparation before you start collecting your data for conducting a functional behavior assessment. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about why do you collect your data and what are the different types of data you can collect. So first of all, why do we collect it? Well, hopefully you've gotten the idea now based on the readings you've been doing. But basically, we really truly need to document um, the need that's going on, the function of the problem behavior, current functioning of the individual, as well as documenting effectiveness of the interventions once we implement them. Keeping in mind, data is collected from um, before when we gather our baseline data, and then once we implement our behavior intervention plan, we still are going to do that ongoing evaluation of the data um, to see if the intervention program is working and how it's working, and to make sure we have some accountability built in. The fidelity piece to a behavior intervention plan, I think, is one of the most important pieces. So we want to make sure we continue to take data to see how it's working for us. So again, going back to identifying when we want to disappear my face here, when we want to collect data, we want to determine what settings and situations will be monitored for that baseline. Essentially, we really need to figure out, again, going back to when the behaviors are most and least likely to occur. So for example, for verbal outbursts, will be measured in class but not on the playground. Talking to peers will be measured in class but not in the hallway during class changing period. We're going to make those differentiations based on the patterns of the behavior that we see. And again, it comes down to what's available, what are we able to do to collect this data. So there's different direct observational recording systems. There's event recording, interval recording, time sampling, duration recording, latency recording. Now, I'm going to briefly go over what these are in this PowerPoint. However, I want to emphasize that in the Unit 3 folder, there is a specific folder titled, if you haven't, or for those who haven't yet taken APCE 629. APCE 629 starts off Unit 1 with direct observation techniques, such as event recording, interval recording, time sampling, etc. Dr. Michelle Athanasio has some wonderful lectures. She has some great resources. She also has some great activities. Rather than reinvent the wheel and make this class a complete redundant unit with what she had, I am not going to focus so much on those because those resources are in your Unit 3 folder. And also, many of you have already taken that course, so you know exactly what those look like. So instead, I'm going to focus more on some of the indirect data collection methods you might have, as well as ABC recording and scatter plot, which I know didn't go into much detail. And then again, really more of the why and how do you put all of this together for that hypothesis. Not so much the technicality about how you directly observe that behavior and record it, but more on the how do you put it all together so that you can develop your hypothesis to eventually create your behavior intervention plan. So moving through this, the dimensions of behavior, we have frequency, which is the number of times. Rate is the ratio of the number over the time. Duration is the length of time the behavior occurs. Latency is the time between a request and the behavior. So we do that a lot with compliance, measuring how long it took between when we asked a student to do something when they actually exhibited that behavior. We might also take latency on if we're looking at social skills, when an individual is asked a question and when they're actually answer that question. And then topography, again, is what that behavior looks like. So going down to that, how do you decide which system to choose? Really, it comes down to looking at the dimensions of the behavior and understanding what you need to know. Again, going back to the end of Unit 1 where we talked about the rocking chair. You don't want to give yourself something to do that doesn't give you anything or get you anywhere. So in some cases, we might need that anecdotal information. Some cases, we also have the permanent product. And during the behavior, we have observational recording. So these are the three different dimensions of behavior that you can collect data on. Okay, sorry, I had to pause that for a moment. So we also want to look at the convenience aspect of this, and that is the convenience of collecting that data. Do we have access to collecting the data? How can we make sure we do get that data that we need? We want to make sure the most important thing is when you decide what type of data you're going to collect and how you're going to do it, it needs to be exact if it's direct measurement. If we're not able to do direct observations of an individual behavior, then we should not say that we're doing direct observations. In other words, a lot of times I'll talk with educators who will say, I'll say, okay, so did you take data on hitting? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, okay, so how many times did he hit during that period of time? And they'll say, about 5. And I'll say, about 5 or exactly 5? There's a big difference. You want to make sure that you're directly reporting it because, sometimes I'll challenge students to do an always or never assignment extra credit. Take data on something that you say, oh, he always does this or he never does that, and see if truly that is the case, because most often we either overestimate or we underestimate in our own minds. So direct observational recording really needs to be the exact in the moment recording. Anecdotal reports are where it's not direct. This is an indirect data collection. It might provide some description. It can be used for analysis. Anecdotal reports can give us information like who, what, when, where. It typically records facts and not interpretations. Examples of some anecdotal reports might be discipline referrals. They might be just any kind of forms that we have students fill out. What happened? What did the behavior look like? What should I do instead? Why did I do it? If we have any student processing types of forms. So those are the kinds of anecdotal reports we'll typically see. Permanent products are very similar to that. Also, we've got permanent products that include, might look at assessment reports that are conducted by different professionals we work with, like occupational therapists or speech language pathologists or school psychologists if you're a school psych. These are often different kinds of assessments that might tell us information about the individual, or it might be a cumulative folder, it might be an IEP. In other words, it might be information that provides us information about the student, but it's not directly about the behavior while it's happening. So it might be information about a student's skill level with respect to a certain area that we're looking at. It's outcome recording. It's durable. It might include audio and video if we're looking at any permanent products like that. It doesn't always record all behavior in the moment. So it really depends on what the permanent product is. But essentially it's something after the fact or before a behavior. It's not in vivo when what we see when we do direct observations. So just to have a little graphic organizer here of different observational systems, we've got antecedent, behavior, consequence. I'm going to talk about the ABC paradigm and how you do that recording. Within all of these, we look at latency. We look at the latency with the antecedent and the behavior. Sorry, that was my lab who just busted into the room. He, all 120 pounds of himself, has a way of really announcing his arrival. And if you didn't hear that loud noise, then you probably think I just lost my mind. Anyway, so going back to the observational, the reason why there's a line between the antecedent and the behavior with latency is because, again, that goes back to the trigger and the behavior. With the antecedent, with the latency recording, we're looking at the stimuli, the SD, and then the actual behavior. With actual direct observations of the behavior where we're looking at it right when it's going on, those are event recording, interval, and time sampling. Duration, we're including the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence because we're taking data the moment the trigger happens, while the behavior is occurring, and all the way through to the end of where that consequence is. So we can see the true behavioral pattern of that behavior. So let's look at ABC continuous recording. ABC continuous recording is incredibly helpful because you're looking at that 3-term contingency that you learned about in APC 628. Basically, you're recording the occurrences of the target behaviors. You're looking at the environmental events within the natural routine during a specific time. Advantages of that: it's precise. It provides you that contextual information. It's a lot more than just the number of the behavior. And it doesn't require disruption of the individual's routine. In fact, you truly just need to sit back and watch the typical pattern of the behavior. So as a behavior analyst, when I would go in to do observations to conduct functional behavior assessments, the hardest part of my job was actually telling the families, basically, I'm in here and I'm like a fly on the wall, even though flies are irritating, but I need you to do what you normally do. I need to see what the typical routine is because I need to see what that ABC looks like for that individual's behavior. That way I can truly see what's happening before, what's triggering that behavior, and then what's maintaining that behavior, that consequence. So sometimes when we're in the environment and we're observing, our observation can hinder the behavior because everyone's kind of looking around us. And that's why it's really good also to train other people to use ABC recording when you're not around. I would often have families, different family members take ABC data, as well as paraprofessionals, as well as even the individual themselves. I would have them take data on themselves. We're going to talk more about how do you extend the FBA process to working with others at the very end of this course. So I'll give you some more techniques and strategies then. Limitations of ABC continuous recording is that sometimes antecedents and consequences don't reliably precede and follow problem behavior. In other words, it might be hard to make correlations or difficult to detect any kind of pattern. There's times when we observe behavior and we have no idea why it's happening. Sometimes we think, oh, it's going to happen in this environment, and then it doesn't happen the next time. So it can really make things difficult. So you can use conditional probabilities, but they can be a little bit misleading with that process. So the ABC narrative recording is basically the data are collected only when the behavior of interest is observed, and it's open-ended. So it can be less time-consuming than that continuous recording. Limitations of the ABC narrative recording, which you should have read about in chapter 24 of the Cooper text, is the utility in identifying the behavioral function. It's not established. It may yield false positive because the data are collected only when the problem behavior occurs. So you're not taking data on when the problem behavior doesn't occur. So you're not seeing those environmental events that might actually be supporting a positive behavior. So basically the same antecedent consequence events may be present when the problem behavior is absent as well. Limitations of that is the reliability may be low. Unless you're trained, observers may report inferred states rather than actual events. Sometimes it's also difficult to discriminate which environmental events actually occasion the problem behavior. So it can be a little more muddy when you look at that strategy. But when we do the ABC recording, what we want to know is the A is what was going on right before the behavior began. B, what exactly was the behavior, again in measurable and observable terms, we call that an operational definition. And C, how did the child or student or person react to the usual consequences that occurred, basically what happened right after that behavior. So A lets us know when to put the new interventions in place. This helps us with preventing those problem behaviors altogether when we write our behavior intervention plan. B ensures that we're measuring the same thing when we're collecting that data. And C, this is the key to understanding why the behavior is maintaining. This is where we see if positive or negative reinforcement is in effect. Or basically, what is the child getting or what is the child getting away from? Again, that would be the positive reinforcement or the negative reinforcement with the obtaining or avoiding. So looking at this with sort of a visual, we've got the problem behavior. Are they trying to obtain or get something or escape or avoid something? This would be, and it could be sensory stimulation. That would be some of that automatic reinforcement, social, tangible activity. So is this positively reinforced or is it negatively reinforced? Again, emphasis when it comes to the social piece, it could be adult or peer mediated, or it could be automatic reinforcement. So let's talk a little bit about that anecdotal indirect data, interviews. Interviews are incredibly informative, and I recommend doing them whenever you do a functional behavior assessment. You want to do an interview sometimes with a student. You can do it with a student. You can even do it with a nonverbal student. A lot of people think you can't, but you really can. You want to find out what the student likes, what they don't like. It's more than just looking at the pattern of the behavior. It's trying to identify potential possibilities, basically, that you could use as interventions. So you can interview educators, you can interview parents. In the last week's unit, there was a lot of indirect assessment forms like the motivation assessment scale and the fast facts and the guess and check, problem behavior questionnaire. All of those can be forms of indirect data interviews that you can provide to other people who work directly with the student. We're going to talk more about these when we finish up the Unit 3 lecture next with Part 3.